Welcome back. Today we're going to do a quick one on the FiiO FT3. So first I do want to thank Apos Audio for loaning me the FT3. I don't have a ton of headphones, so I try to take advantage of people who are willing to send me gear to listen to and enjoy for a couple weeks, and that is exactly what happened with FT3. I think I kind of got in the zone with this one, got it dialed in to where I liked it, and very much an enjoyable thing. I kind of had more fun listening to it as opposed to taking notes and being super critical about it. So we'll go through this one in a casual way. I think it's a very cool set. It came out, I don't know, not quite a year ago, but somewhere around there. And for those of you who are used to cheaper headphones like me that are all plastic and that clickety-clack of plastic, this one is an all aluminum build, so it's actually quite nice. I remember people complaining about the design. Maybe it's not mature enough, maybe it's not original enough, and I thought it was fine. It's an open back set. It's got an aluminum build. It's got a very nice build quality considering the price, which is like, I think $300. I think it's $299. So I got no complaints, all that. I think people who are headphone people probably complain more about it. But for me, I'm used to more plastic parts, and this is definitely a step up in that area. The cable also has a sort of a more interesting story than maybe the headphones. So the original 5,000 original sets, I think serial numbers 0 through 5,000, should have included a Furukawa copper 3-meter cable. So this is a 3-meter cable, but the serial number is over 5,000. So I have a feeling this is just a crystal copper cable. If this was the Furukawa cable, I probably would have, wrapped it around me like a blanket and slept with it. But you don't often see 3 meters of Furukawa copper, and that would have been a huge bonus. But I think this one is just the normal one. But it's a bit chunky, a bit unwieldy. 3 meters is something longer than I would use. I sit at my desk and have an amp kind of behind the monitor, so I don't really need all 3 meters of it. But I think FiiO does really nice cables. I think that is for people who are looking for a bulkier, thicker, very nice cable. I think they did that on the original. I think they did that pretty well. So at the same time, I had actually asked Apos if they would have an extra flow cable to send me, because I had read about their flow cables, and I thought this would have been a great chance to try one out. And compared to the bulkiness of the FiiO cable, this is 1.5 meters sleeved, very thin connectors and a nice lightweight. This is what I would use at my desk, and that's exactly what I used at my desk. It's a very nice cable. It's about $100, I think, on the Apos site, and I can't argue with it being a perfect drop-in replacement for people who don't want the bulkiness of this or need all 3 meters of it. 1.5 meters, sleeved, soft, nice thin connectors, still metal, very nice build quality. I think they kind of nailed that, and glad and thankful that I actually had a chance to hold a flow cable in my hand. So I thought that was pretty cool too. So let's kind of jump into it, and I'll try to move these out of the way. So what is special here, and from the marketing from FiiO side, 16 millimeter dynamic driver, open back, 350 ohm impedance. So it does take a little bit to drive it. Beryllium plated gasket, DLC diaphragm, angled drivers, aluminum build, as I talked about. So I think they got a lot of the marketing points right on this one. I think FiiO does a really nice job on marketing, and I think they got all of that down pretty well. So what needs your attention with the FT3? And I think you start with the pads, but for me, I will start with the source. And you got to align a few variables: power, tonality, and extension. So power, 350 ohm impedance, is going to take a little bit to drive this guy. I think that's pretty obvious. Tonality, you have to really think about what the signature is here. It's got a kind of a mid-bass warmth to it. It's got an upper-mid bump to it. Either you want those emphasized in your source or you don't. You've got to understand what is happening when you hear weird things coming out of this headphone, and a lot of it comes back to the tonality of your source and what it's doing. And then on maybe the stage side and the treble extension, it's not there's no boost at the far end, so you have to be really careful about a source that isn't as extended as it should be to make this one sound as optimal as it could be. So pads, it comes with suede and leather. I definitely went with the suede, and you hear the difference between the two in the bass and the stage. A little bit more warmth with the suede and a lot more stage with the suede. So the leather, I tried them, but that was a big no. I think the stage on the leather was just way too in your head, and it had a sharper feel to it. And we'll talk about this upper mid bump in a minute. So sound, like I said, there's kind of a slight B to it, a slight V to it, mid bass and upper mid bumps, and you'll sort of notice those as you listen to it. The bass was definitely my favorite part of this, how they handled the bass and the bass curve they did, and being an IM guy and hearing this curve on a big 60mm dynamic driver was actually my favorite part of this. And they didn't overboost the mid bass to compensate for the open back sub bass roll off, and that's sort of what I expected them to do. I mean, I expected them to overdo the bass just a little bit. You got an open back and it's going to roll off slightly. So instead, they ended up with a really gentle mid bass bump and having a sub bass roll off. It's almost like the long arc of an IEM in that bass shelf, and that's one of my favorite bass shelves because you end up with a sharper mid bass that has a little bit more definition to it. It sounds cleaner. There's a bit more impact to it because it's cleaner, and I think they actually pulled that off really well. This one definitely goes deep enough. 16mm dynamic driver. It's gonna, even though the graph would look like it rolls off a little bit with the open back, I think they actually got it quite dialed in, so it actually does go deep enough. You don't really notice it as much, but definitely the cleaner mid bass, and there's some texture and impact, and just exactly what you would want in a 16mm. There's just enough bump to add warmth and take on more genres, but also to leave some space into the mids to be open and a little bit more air and allow them to breathe. And I think they got that dialed in really well with just a slight bump. And again, I'll say that they pulled that off quite well. And listening to a lot of IEMs, not too many people pull it off the way they did it. And maybe it's just easier to do on a bigger driver. But yeah, I give them kind of props for what they did on the bass curve there. So the mids, the lower has that slight warm transition from the bass. That's exactly what I like to hear. It takes on more genres. It doesn't sound overly thin. It can do male vocals, female vocals. I think they got that bit quite right. And then the upper is boosted slightly, and it gives you a slight edge. So your male vocals kind of have some body to it, but then you get some edge to it on the upper end, and I think they actually nailed that quite well. Again, one of those things that's actually harder to do on an IEM is to balance those two so they sound a little bit more natural. And an IEM, you have such a small tolerance to make that to go off natural. And not too many people actually pull that off. And these guys actually did a pretty good job at it. And IEMs do it for the exact same reason. So you're sitting there tuning your set, and you're like, yeah, can we just eke a little bit more resolution out of this driver? So you tend to bump the upper mid just slightly, and it gives you a more apparent resolution. It's exactly what they did here as well. It's hard to do on an IEM because it tends to thin out the sound. And on here, you've got such a full bottom end to it. And then you just tweak this just a little bit, give it a slight bump, and you end up with a really nice midsection. That's what happened here. So some will enjoy that added definition and sharpening that you get by bumping the upper mid just a little bit. Others will say it takes it off natural. If you're really into timbre, you'll notice it kind of right away. But if you're just listening to the mids and you're listening to the definition of people's voices and details, you'll sort of feel more at home with that as opposed to listening to it for its naturalness. So also what works here, higher impedance, right? That 350 ohms, this is where you hear it. Everything sounds better against a darker background, especially the apparent dynamic range and separation. So push the black background, make that really black, and then you end up hearing sort of more apparent dynamic range. That's just the way it works. That's the way kind of our brains work with that. And it's actually noticeable on this set because of the impedance. The mids will pop more against a darker background without the need to overboost. So again, like I said, they did a really subtle boost to it, but it's helped by this black background. Everything sounds kind of more dynamic and a wider range than it probably really is. So again, a lot of thought went into that tuning and what they did, and a lot of props to what they did on the mids and the bass on that tuning, because you can kind of just listen to it and hear what they did, and I kind of appreciate that. So the treble, do pay attention to, this is where your source part, don't push the upper mid, lower treble too forward. It's already forward. Pushing it more forward will not be such a great thing, but pushing the extension, the higher treble, that will work in your favor as in a bigger stage, and just hearing more extension. I think once you're past that sharper lower bit in the treble, and that gives you the edge to the vocals, and it really smooths out and kind of trails off, and you don't want to lose that extension in the upper treble so it sounds any less detailed. So do be aware of what's going on in your treble on your source and how it sounds on the FT3. And the stage, again, pay really attention to your source and the pads and the projection and where everything is. If it sounds mostly in your head or small, try a different source. I don't think it's actually just power on this guy. I think it's the combination of all the factors I talked about earlier. But there's a definite shift from being in your head with the leather pads, switching to suede, you have some projection, adding different source with different tonality and not being so upper mid. Don't bring those two forward because that's going to flatten everything out. Once you find the right combination of everything, you actually do get nice projection and a really nice sound stage. It just takes some playing around with the variables to get those right on the FT3. So that is what I got. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and thank Apos for sending this one to me, and I will see you guys next time.